Save yourself. That's the first rule of survival in the high Rockies, especially when the temperature drops to 18 degrees below zero and the wind screams through the pines like a living thing with teeth. Senna Brennan heard that rule in her father's voice even though he'd been dead for 10 years. Heard it in the crackle of her ancient AM radio as the NOAA weather alert repeated its dire warning. Heard it in the rational part of her brain that understood hypothermia, understood exposure, understood that a 21-year-old Omega who couldn't shift had absolutely no business being 12 miles from Elk Ridge in a blizzard that meteorologists were calling unsurvivable. But Senna had also spent 10 years learning what it felt like to be the one no one saved. 10 years knowing the particular cold that came from being watched, while you suffered from being considered not worth the effort from dying slowly, while everyone pretended not to notice. And she wouldn't let that happen to anyone else, not even to strangers, not even if it killed her. The snow fell so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Her father's old Carhartt jacket, patched and repatched, did little against the wind that cut through the Medicine Bow Range like a blade designed specifically for this purpose. Her boots, good quality once but worn thin over a decade of neglect, crunched through snow that already reached mid-calf and showed no signs of stopping. Senna checked her hand-drawn map one more time, protecting the paper from the wind with her body. 7 years of careful observation. 7 years of marking every trail, every landmark, every place where the terrain shifted in ways that mattered. Her father had taught her this before the hunting accident took him, before her mother Cordelia married Garrick Brennan, and Senna's life became a study in systematic erasure. The blood trail was getting harder to follow, new snow covering the dark drops almost as fast as they fell, but Senna had learned to track more than just visual signs. The wind carried scents even in a blizzard, copper and fear, silver and poison. And underneath it all, something else. Something that made the dormant wolf inside her, silent for so long, stir with the faintest whisper of recognition. She'd been tracking for 40 minutes when she found the first one. A massive gray wolf, easily twice the size of any natural animal, lay half buried in a snowdrift. Silver wire wrapped around its chest and front legs, cutting deep into flesh that should have healed but couldn't. The wolf's breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Its eyes, amber and intelligent and filled with pain, tracked Senna's approach with the wariness of a creature that had learned the hard way that bipeds meant death. Senna dropped to her knees beside it, ignoring the snow that immediately soaked through her jeans. Her small medical kit, cobbled together from pharmacy scraps and foraged plants, seemed pitifully inadequate for the task ahead. But it was all she had. "I'm going to help you," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. The wolf probably couldn't understand her words, but maybe it could hear the intent beneath them. "I know it hurts. I know you're scared, but I'm going to help you." She pulled out her father's old pocket knife, the blade worn but sharp, and began the delicate work of cutting away silver wire that had been designed to kill. Each strand she removed released a fresh flow of blood, dark against white snow. The wolf whimpered but didn't fight her. Couldn't fight her. Didn't have the strength left. Senna worked with hands that were already starting to lose feeling in the cold. She applied yarrow powder to slow the bleeding, packed the worst wounds with snow, to numb and constrict, wrapped everything she could reach, with strips torn from her own flannel shirt beneath the jacket. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something, one down. She could already see the shapes of others through the blowing snow. 32 more to go. The second wolf was smaller, younger, with russet fur and terrified eyes that reminded Senna of her own reflection on bad days. The third had patches of white mixed with brown-silver wire, so deeply embedded that Senna had to cut through flesh to reach it. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth. Her radio, clipped to her belt, crackled with another update. The blizzard was intensifying, wind speeds approaching 80 miles per hour, temperature continuing to drop. Anyone caught outside should seek shelter immediately. This was not a survivable situation. Senna's core temperature had already dropped from her normal 98.6 to somewhere around 96. She could feel it in the way her thoughts moved a little slower, the way her fingers fumbled with tasks that should have been automatic. Hypothermia didn't announce itself with fanfare. It crept in, quiet and patient, stealing heat and clarity in measures so small you didn't notice until it was too late. But she'd made a promise to the first wolf. To all of them. And Senna Brennan had learned the hard way that when you had nothing else, when you'd been stripped of dignity and status, and even the basic right to be seen as worth saving, you still had your word. You still had the choice of what kind of person you'd be when no one was watching. Wolf number 17 was barely breathing when she found it. The silver poisoning had progressed further in this one, spreading through its system like wildfire through dry timber. Senna mixed a paste of dried wolfsbane carefully measured. Too much would kill, too little would do nothing. But in microdoses, paradoxically, it could help the body process and neutralize silver toxicity. She'd read about it in her father's old veterinary texts, the ones Cordelia had tried to throw away, but Senna had hidden in a hollow tree 3 miles from the Elk Ridge packhouse. Theory was one thing, practice with numb fingers and fading light, and the very real possibility that she was about to accidentally poison a dying wolf was something else entirely. She forced the paste between the wolf's jaws, massaging its throat to encourage swallowing. Then she waited, counting heartbeats, watching for any sign that she'd just made a fatal mistake. The wolf's breathing steadied, not much, not enough to call it recovery, but enough to buy time. As she worked, something strange happened. The wolf's eyes met hers, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, she felt an urge pulse through her chest. Not fear, not compassion, something else, something that whispered submit in a voice that wasn't quite hers. The wolf's head lowered fractionally, a gesture of deference that made no sense. Wolves didn't submit to humans, especially not to broken omegas. Hypothermia hallucinations, Senna told herself, pushing the strangeness aside. Just the cold playing tricks. 23 down, 10 to go. Senna could no longer feel her feet. Her hands moved mechanically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had started to falter. She was so cold now that the wind didn't even hurt anymore. That was bad. That was very bad. That meant her body was shutting down non-essential systems, conserving heat for the vital core, preparing for the end. Her internal temperature had dropped to 94 degrees, then 93. The medical text she'd memorized said that below 95 judgment became impaired. Below 93, you entered moderate hypothermia, confusion, loss of fine motor control, irrational behavior. Below 90, severe hypothermia, unconsciousness, death. But there were still wolves dying in the snow, still creatures who deserved better than to freeze alone in the dark while the world moved on without them. Wolf 29 had white fur streaked with gray-silver wire wrapped around its throat in a way that suggested someone had known exactly how to cause maximum suffering. Senna's frozen fingers struggled with the wire. It took 3 tries to cut through. The wolf didn't even whimper when she finally freed it. That was worse than pain. That was the sound of giving up. "Stay with me," Senna whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the wolf or herself anymore. "Stay with me, just a little longer, just until I finish." 30 wolves saved, 3 to go. The world had started to narrow her vision, tunneling in that particular way that meant her brain wasn't getting enough oxygen, wasn't getting enough heat. Senna stumbled through the snow, following the blood trail more by instinct than sight now. Her core temperature hit 92 degrees, then 91. Wolf 31 was already gone by the time she reached it. Senna closed its eyes anyway, her movements slow and dreamlike. 32 was still fighting, still clinging to life, with the kind of desperate tenacity Senna recognized in her bones. She treated it on autopilot, her body performing tasks her mind could no longer fully direct. One more. Just one more. Oh. She found the 33rd wolf slightly separated from the others, half buried in snow, that had drifted against a fallen pine. This one was enormous, easily the largest she'd encountered. Its fur was pure black, darker than the storm-darkened sky, darker than the spaces between stars. Even dying, even poisoned and frozen and wrapped in silver wire designed to torture it, radiated a kind of power that made Senna's dormant wolf, silent for so long, suddenly surge against the inside of her chest like it was trying to claw its way out. The wolf's eyes opened as she approached. Not brown, not amber, gold. Pure, burning gold that seemed to glow in the darkness that locked onto her with an intensity that should have been terrifying, but somehow wasn't. Senna collapsed to her knees beside it, no longer able to stand. Her core temperature had dropped to 90 degrees. She was dying. They both were. But she'd promised. She'd promised to save them all. Her knife slipped from numb fingers twice before she managed to grip it properly. The silver wire had cut deep into this wolf, deeper than any of the others, wrapped in patterns that spoke of deliberate cruelty rather than simple trapping. Someone had wanted this one to suffer, had wanted it to die slowly, to feel every second of the poison working through its system. Senna cut the first strand, then the second. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she almost stabbed the wolf instead of the wire. The black wolf didn't flinch, just kept watching her with those impossible eyes, like molten gold, like it was memorizing her face, like it was seeing something in her that she'd never been able to see in herself. The last strand of silver wire fell away. Senna applied yarrow powder with fingers that could barely feel what they were touching, packed snow around the worst wounds, wrapped everything she could reach with the last strips of her shirt. She was so cold now she'd stopped shivering. That was the final stage. That was the body giving up. I did it, she whispered to the black wolf, her words slurring like she was drunk. I saved all of you, every single one. The wolf made a sound, not quite a whimper, something else. Something that felt like recognition, like understanding, like a promise being made in a language Senna's human ears couldn't quite hear, but her dormant wolf understood perfectly. Senna Brennan, the broken Omega of Elk Ridge, the girl who couldn't shift and couldn't matter and couldn't be worth saving, closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. She'd kept her word. She'd saved them all. If that was the last thing she ever did, it was enough. But before consciousness left completely, before the cold claimed its final victory, she felt something impossible. Heat, radiating from the black wolf, spreading through the clearing like wildfire through dry grass. And a voice deep and ancient and filled with barely contained emotion echoing inside her mind where no voice should be able to reach. I found you. Finally, after all this time, I found you. Mine. Then the world went dark and Senna knew nothing at all. 2 days in the dark, consciousness returned slowly, reluctantly, like wading through thick honey. Senna became aware of things in stages. First warmth, blessed, impossible warmth seeping into bones that had been frozen solid. Then softness beneath her, some kind of mattress that felt like clouds compared to the hard cot she'd slept on for the past 10 years in the Elk Ridge Omega quarters. Then pain. Her hands burned like they'd been set on fire. Her feet felt like someone had driven nails through every nerve. Her chest ached with each breath, her throat raw from breathing superheated air in an overheated room, or maybe from screaming. Had she been screaming? She couldn't remember. Senna forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus slowly, details emerging from blur like a photograph developing. Stone ceiling rough-hewn but polished smooth, firelight dancing across surfaces warm and golden. Windows showing mountains so tall they seemed to touch the sky, peaks white with snow that caught the afternoon sun and threw back 1,000 colors. This wasn't Elk Ridge. This was nowhere Senna had ever been. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room spun, her stomach lurched, and a voice spoke from somewhere to her left. Don't move. You nearly died. Your body needs time to recover. The voice was male, deep, with a quality that seemed to resonate in the chest rather than just the ears. Senna turned her head carefully and saw him. A man standing by the window, backlit by mountain light in a way that should have made his features hard to see, but somehow didn't. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of a warrior's build. His hair was black as midnight, falling to his shoulders in waves that caught the light. But it was his gaze that trapped her, held her captive. Those eyes, the same impossible color as the 33rd wolf. Molten gold that held ancient fire. The black wolf, the one she'd saved last. You, Senna whispered, her voice coming out as a rasp. You were the wolf. The man moved closer, each step deliberate and controlled, like a predator, deciding whether to attack or simply observe its prey. He wore simple clothes, dark wool pants, and a loose shirt that did nothing to hide the power coiled in his frame. Even in human form, he radiated authority, danger, something that made every instinct Senna possessed scream, both run and submit simultaneously. Yes, he said simply. My name is Thorn Ashford, and you, Senna Brennan, saved my life and the lives of my entire elite guard. Senna's mind raced, trying to process Thorn Ashford. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he carried himself, the way the very air seemed to shift around him, suggested someone important, someone powerful, someone way above her station. How long, she managed. How long have I been unconscious? 2 days. You had severe hypothermia. Your core temperature dropped to 89 degrees. The healer said you should have died. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in that burning gaze. They said it was a miracle you survived it all, let alone long enough for us to get you here and begin treatment. 2 days. Senna's hands flew to her throat, checking for the Omega collar she was required to wear at Elk Ridge. Gone. Someone had removed it while she was unconscious. She felt naked without it exposed, even though she'd always hated the thing. Where is here? She asked. Wolfstone Palace, Cascade Valley in the heart of Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming. Thorn moved to the chair beside her bed, settling into it with a grace that belied his size. My home, the seat of the Northern Territories. The Northern Territories? Senna had heard of them, of course. 7 packs spanning 3 mountain ranges united under a single alpha king who'd ruled for nearly a century. The kind of power that made even someone like Garrick Brennan, Alpha of Elk Ridge, speak in tones of grudging respect mixed with barely concealed fear. And she'd just saved the life of their king. I didn't know, Senna said quickly. When I found you all, I didn't know who you were. I wasn't trying to gain favor or manipulate or... Thorn held up a hand, silencing her. I understand. That's what makes it remarkable. He leaned forward slightly, his intense stare never wavering. You saved us because we were dying, not because you expected reward, not because you sought political advantage. You risked your own life for strangers, for wolves you'd never met, asking nothing in return. Anyone would have done the same thing. No. The single word was flat final. No, they wouldn't have. Most wolves would have run for help, prioritized their own survival. Some might have saved one or two, the strongest, the most likely to survive. But you, Senna, you spent 4 hours in a blizzard treating 33 wolves one by one. You used techniques our own healers didn't know. You nearly froze to death because you refused to leave anyone behind. Senna didn't know what to say to that. In her experience, pointing out that she'd only done what was right usually led to people explaining all the ways she was wrong, all the ways her judgment was flawed, all the ways an Omega who couldn't shift had no business having opinions about right and wrong. Thorn seemed to read something in her silence. His features softened fractionally. How did you learn those healing techniques, the yarrow for bleeding, the wolfsbane paste for silver poisoning? Those aren't common knowledge, especially not for someone so young. My father was a veterinarian before he died, Senna said quietly. He had books, medical texts, field guides to Rocky Mountain flora. When he died and my mother remarried, the new Pack Alpha said they were trash. Said an Omega had no need for education, but I hid them in the woods. Spent 10 years teaching myself. 10 years. A note of respect colored his voice. Since you were 11 years old, you've been secretly educating yourself. That takes discipline, determination. It takes having nothing better to do when you're not allowed to participate in pack life. The words came out more bitter than Senna intended. She looked away, focusing on the mountains outside the window. I couldn't shift. Still can't. So I'm useless for hunting, for border patrol, for anything that matters. Learning seemed like a better use of time than sitting in the Omega quarters being reminded daily that I'm broken. Silence stretched between them. When Thorn spoke again, his voice was careful. You're not broken, Senna. You saved 33 wolves that my own healers said were beyond saving. You survived exposure that should have killed you. You taught yourself advanced medicine from books alone with no guidance. None of that sounds broken to me. Before Senna could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Thorn's posture shifted fractionally from almost relaxed to alert. Enter. The door opened to reveal a man who looked to be in his mid-60s, though something in his bearing suggested he was much older. He had silver gray hair, sharp features, and eyes that assessed Senna with the cool calculation of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people and situations. Finian, Thorn said, some of the formality dropping from his voice. Is everything prepared? Yes, my lord. The council is assembled. They're waiting for your report. The man Finian glanced at Senna, his expression unreadable. And curious about our unexpected guest. I'm sure they are. Thorn stood his full height, suddenly filling the room in a way that made Senna acutely aware of how small she felt in the large bed. Senna, this is Finian Locke, my beta and chief strategist. Finian, this is Senna Brennan, the healer who saved us. Finian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect maybe, or curiosity. Miss Brennan, the entire palace owes you a debt we can never fully repay. I didn't do it for payment, Senna said automatically, which is precisely why the debt is so profound. Finian turned to Thorn. The council needs to know about the trap, about who set it and why. Senna's stomach clenched. What do you mean, who set it? Thorn exchanged a glance with Finian, some silent communication passing between them. Then he looked back at Senna, and those eyes, like molten amber, held something that might have been regret. The trap that nearly killed us wasn't random, he said. Someone knew our route. Someone knew exactly where to place silver wire for maximum damage. And when my trackers investigated after the storm cleared, they found evidence. He paused. Scent markers from Elk Ridge Pack, and a piece of cloth torn that carries a very distinctive perfume. Lavender and rose expensive quality. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Senna gripped the bed covers, her knuckles going white. That's my mother's perfume. She's the only one in Elk Ridge who wears that specific scent. Garrett gives it to her for special occasions. I'm aware, Thorn said gently, which is why I need to understand what's happening in your pack. Why someone from Elk Ridge would want to assassinate me and my guard, and why you specifically happen to be in exactly the right place to save us. The implication hit like a physical blow. You think I was part of it? You think I set the trap and then staged a rescue to gain your trust? I think, Thorne said carefully, that I need to understand the full picture before I make any judgments. And I think you're the key to understanding it. Senna's mind raced. Her mother involved in an assassination attempt. It seemed impossible, except it didn't. Cordelia had always been ambitious, always status conscious, always willing to do whatever it took to improve her position. And Garrick, her stepfather, had been talking about expansion lately, about Elk Ridge Pack taking its rightful place among the great packs, about the northern territories being weak because their alpha king chose diplomacy over domination. I didn't know, Senna said, her voice small. If my mother was involved, if Garrick planned this, I swear I had no idea. I was just in the woods because I wanted to avoid the Omega ceremony. I tracked the blood because that's what you do when you find injured animals. I didn't even know you were wolves until I got close enough to see. I believe you, Thorne said, and the surprising thing was that he sounded like he meant it. Your actions in the blizzard speak for themselves. No one spends 4 hours dying to save people they're supposed to betray. But Senna, this puts you in a difficult position. Someone in Elk Ridge, possibly your own family, tried to kill me. And now you're here in my palace, having saved my life. You want me to spy on them, Senna said flatly. Go back to Elk Ridge and report on their activities. No, Thorne's response was immediate and firm. I would never ask you to betray your pack, your family, regardless of what they may have done. That's not who I am. Then what do you want from me? Thorne was quiet for a long moment, those burning eyes searching her face like he was trying to read something written there in a language only he could understand. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, careful. I want to offer you a choice. You can return to Elk Ridge if that's what you wish. I'll provide safe transport resources, whatever you need. But I won't lie to you, if you go back, you'll be walking into a situation that's likely to become dangerous very quickly. When I confront your alpha about this assassination attempt, there will be consequences. And as the weakest member of that pack, you'll probably suffer them. Senna's throat tightened. He was right, of course. If Garrick had really tried to kill the Alpha King and failed, he'd be looking for someone to blame. And Senna, the broken Omega who just happened to save Thorne's life, would be a very convenient scapegoat. Or, Thorne continued, you can stay here. I'm formally offering you a position in my household as a healer. You've demonstrated skills my own medical staff doesn't possess. You saved 33 lives that we thought were lost. That kind of talent, that kind of compassion, those are things I value in my court. A healer, Senna repeated slowly. Not an Omega servant. A healer, Thorne confirmed. With all the respect and resources that position entails. Your own quarters, access to medical supplies and techs, the opportunity to continue learning and developing your skills. And Senna, my protection. While you're part of my household, anyone who harms you answers to me personally. It was too good to be true. Had to be. Men like Thorne Ashford, powerful alphas, who ruled kingdoms, didn't just offer broken Omegas positions of respect and protection. There had to be a catch. Had to be some ulterior motive she wasn't seeing. Why? The question burst out before Senna could stop it. Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. Because you saved my life when you had absolutely nothing to gain from it, Thorne said simply. Because you're clearly intelligent and resourceful and brave. Because I've spent 89 years learning to read people, and everything about you tells me you're genuine. And because, Senna, I have a feeling that whatever's happening with Elk Ridge and this assassination attempt, you're going to be at the center of it, whether you want to be or not. I'd rather you be here safe and protected than back there being used as a pawn in games you don't even know are being played. Senna wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly her chest ached with the wanting. To be valued for her skills, to be protected instead of persecuted, to have access to real medical knowledge instead of scraps and stolen books. It was everything she'd dreamed about during 10 years of being invisible. But dreams like that didn't come true for wolves like her. And men like Thorne, no matter how sincere they seemed, always wanted something in return. I need time, she said finally, to think, to understand what I'd be agreeing to. Of course. Thorne stood, and Senna was struck again by how he filled the space, how the air seemed to shift around him. Take all the time you need, but Senna, understand this. Your stepfather will know by now that you're missing. The blizzard has cleared. Your absence from the Omega ceremony will have been noted. He's going to come looking for you. And when he does, when he arrives at my palace demanding answers, I need to know what you want me to tell him. The thought of Garrick coming here, of facing him after what she'd learned about the assassination attempt, made Senna's stomach clench with old familiar fear. But underneath the fear, something else stirred. The same stubborn determination that had kept her in that blizzard for 4 hours, that had made her refuse to leave anyone behind. If he comes, Senna said slowly, tell him I'm exactly where I choose to be. Thorne's expression transformed, a smile spreading across his face that made him look years younger. I was hoping you'd say that. He moved toward the door, Finian following. But before they left, Thorne paused and looked back at her. One more thing, Senna. When you were unconscious, you talked. Fragments, mostly fever dreams. But you kept saying the same thing over and over. His amber gaze was intense, seeing too much. No one came for me. No one ever comes. Do you remember what that means? Senna's chest tightened. She remembered. Remembered being 11 years old, locked in the basement of the Elk Ridge pack house for 3 days after her shifting ceremony when no wolf appeared. Remembered crying for her mother for anyone to let her out. Remembered the silence that answered her pleas. It means I understand what it feels like to be left to suffer alone, she said quietly. It means I recognize what it's like when no one thinks you're worth saving. That's why I couldn't walk away from those wolves, because I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone. Thorne held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and definitive. No one's leaving you to suffer alone anymore, Senna. Not while I'm alive. That's a promise. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Senna alone with mountains and firelight, and the dawning realization that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. She'd saved the Alpha King, and now somehow, impossibly, he was trying to save her back. Day 4. 4 days after the blizzard morning came too early sunlight, streaming through windows that faced peaks so sharp they looked like they could cut the sky. Senna woke to find new clothes laid out on the chair beside her bed, practical leather pants, a soft wool tunic, and deep forest green boots that actually looked like they'd fit. Not the threadbare Omega Grays she'd worn for 10 years. Real clothes, the kind pack members wore when they had value. A young woman appeared at her door moments after Senna sat up, carrying a tray laden with more food than Senna usually saw in a week. Scrambled eggs with cheese, thick slices of bacon, fresh bread still warm from the oven, berries that must have cost a fortune this late in the season. Compliments of Alpha Ashford, the woman said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. She had kind eyes, warm brown, and a smile that seemed genuine. He said you'd need your strength for today. I'm Marin, by the way. I'll be helping you get settled if you decide to stay. If I decide, Senna repeated, picking up a piece of bacon and biting into it before her brain could remind her that accepting food created obligation. The taste exploded across her tongue, salt and smoke, and richness that made her want to cry. When had she last eaten something that wasn't leftovers or scraps? That's what Alpha Ashford said. That it's your choice. Marin moved around the room with practiced efficiency, opening curtains, stoking the fire that had burned low overnight. Between you and me, that's kind of his thing. Choices, respect, making sure people have agency even when tradition says they shouldn't. Senna ate in silence, processing that. An Alpha King who cared about agency. It seemed contradictory, like saying fire was cold or water was dry. Alphas took. They commanded. They expected obedience. That's how the hierarchy worked, how it had always worked. Except Thorne hadn't commanded her to stay, he'd offered. And that small difference felt revolutionary. The council meeting is at noon, Marin said, laying out toiletries Senna hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Alpha Ashford wants you there, not to testify or anything official, just to be present. He thinks you should hear what's said about the trap about Elk Ridge. Senna's appetite vanished. My stepfather, is he coming? Already here, arrived 2 hours ago with an entourage of 30 wolves. Marin's expression turned carefully neutral. Which is interesting, considering protocol only allows visiting alphas to bring 10 guards maximum. Alpha Ashford hasn't said anything about it yet, but Beta Locke is watching them very closely. 30 wolves. Garrick was making a statement, showing his strength, trying to intimidate, before any accusations were even made. It was exactly the kind of move he'd make, aggressive posturing disguised as respect. Senna forced herself to finish eating, then let Marin help her bathe and dress. The clothes fit perfectly, which meant someone had taken her measurements while she was unconscious. That should have felt invasive, but somehow it just felt practical, efficient, like someone had actually paid attention to her needs instead of expecting her to make do with whatever didn't fit anyone else. The face that looked back at her from the mirror was familiar but strange. Same brown hair, same gray eyes, same features she'd stopped really seeing years ago. But the exhaustion that usually shadowed her face had faded slightly, and the clothes, simple as they were, made her look less like a ghost and more like a person. You look lovely, Marin said, and the surprising thing was, she sounded like she meant it. Ready. Senna wasn't. Would never be ready to face Garrick again, to see the cold calculation in his eyes when he looked at his broken stepdaughter, who'd somehow ended up in the Alpha King's palace. But she nodded anyway because running had never been an option, and hiding had never worked. The walk through Wolfstone Palace was like moving through a dream. Corridors carved from living stone, polished smooth, but retaining their natural character. Windows that framed the Teton Range like paintings. And wolves everywhere, wolves moving with purpose through their daily routines. Some nodded to Senna as she passed. Others stared with open curiosity. None looked at her the way Elkridge wolves did, like she was furniture that occasionally made noise. As she walked past a group of younger wolves carrying supplies, one of them, a beta male judging by his build, glanced her way and immediately lowered his gaze. Not aggressive submission, something else. Something that felt like recognition. Respect. It was gone so quickly, Senna wondered if she'd imagined it. The council chamber was circular, with a domed ceiling painted to show the night sky. A massive round table dominated the center with seats for perhaps 20 wolves. Most were already occupied when Marin led Senna inside. She recognized Thorn immediately sitting at what was clearly the position of honor, with Finian at his right hand. 7 other wolves, all radiating alpha authority, were ranged around the table at precise intervals. The 7-pack alphas, who swore fealty to Thorn, Senna guessed, and at the far end of the table, his face carved from stone and his eyes blazing with barely contained fury, sat Garrick Brennan. He'd aged in the 2 days since Senna had seen him last. New lines around his mouth, new tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man under pressure, which made sense if he'd really tried to assassinate the Alpha King and failed. His eyes found Senna the moment she entered. The look he gave her could have frozen water. Not surprised, not concerned that she was alive. Just cold, calculating rage at her presence here in this place at this moment. Senna lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. She'd spent 10 years learning to make herself small to avoid his attention, to survive by being invisible. But something had changed in that blizzard, in those hours of choosing to save rather than survive. She wasn't going to make herself small anymore. Ah, Senna, Thorn's voice cut through the tension. Come, sit here beside me. Every wolf in the room turned to stare. Senna heard Garrick's sharp intake of breath, saw fury flash across his face before he controlled it. The seat to the Alpha King's left, directly across from his beta, was a position of tremendous honor. It was where mates sat, where heirs sat, not where broken Omegas belonged. But Thorn was watching her with that steady gaze, and there was challenge in his expression. A question. Would she claim the space he offered, or would she defer to the old hierarchies, the old rules that said she had no right to be here at all? Sent across the room and took the seat. The leather was soft, worn smooth by years of use. From here she could see everyone at the table. Could see Garrick's face turning red with suppressed rage. Could see several of the 7 alphas exchanging meaningful glances. Now that we're all assembled, Thorn said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, despite its measured tone. Let's begin. 3 nights ago, my elite guard and I were ambushed in the Medicine Bow Range while returning from a diplomatic summit. Someone knew our route. Someone set a trap lined with silver wire designed to kill. We would have died in that blizzard, all 33 of us, if not for the courage of one wolf. His hand gestured towards Senna, making every eye turn to her again. Senna Brennan found us dying in the snow. She spent 4 hours treating our wounds using techniques our own healers didn't know. She saved every single one of us, nearly killing herself in the process. The Northern Territories owes her a debt we can never fully repay. Murmurs rippled around the table. Senna caught fragments. An Omega? Brennan Elkridge. Impossible, before Thorn's raised hand brought silence. However, he continued, and his voice went cold. Our investigation into the trap has revealed troubling evidence. Scent markers from Elk Ridge Pack, a piece of cloth bearing Elk Ridge colors, and traces of a very distinctive perfume, lavender and rose, expensive and unique. All eyes turned to Garrick. He sat perfectly still, his expression neutral, giving away nothing. Alpha Brennan, Thorn said formally, I'm giving you the opportunity to explain. What do you know about this assassination attempt? Garrick stood slowly, deliberately, his movement carrying menace. Even here, in another Alpha's territory, he projected power danger, the threat of violence barely leashed. I know nothing about any assassination attempt, Alpha King, he said, his voice carrying false concern. If evidence from my territory was found at the scene, I can only assume it was planted there to implicate Elk Ridge. We've had no quarrel with the Northern Territories. We've honored every treaty, paid every tribute. This accusation is baseless. Is it? Finian spoke for the first time, his voice dry as old paper. Because our intelligence suggests that Elk Ridge has been in contact with several other packs over the past 6 months. Packs that have expressed dissatisfaction with Northern Territory's policies. Packs that believe strength should rule over diplomacy. Garrick's jaw tightened fractionally. I speak with many alphas. That's not a crime. Building alliances, maintaining relationships, these are normal pack politics. Normal, Thorne agreed. Unless those alliances are built on a foundation of treason. The word hung in the air like a blade. Several of the 7 alphas shifted in their seats. This was getting dangerous accusations that could lead to war if not handled carefully. I'll ask you again, Alpha Brennan. The Alpha King's stare was hard, unyielding. What do you know about the trap that nearly killed me and my guard? I know, Garrick said slowly, that my stepdaughter had access to my mate's perfume. That she's been unstable for years, resentful of her position, prone to delusions of grandeur. I know that she disappeared the same night you were attacked, that she just happened to be in exactly the right place to stage a dramatic rescue. The implication hit Senna like a physical blow. He was accusing her, painting her as the architect of the assassination attempt, the one who'd set the trap and then orchestrated her own heroic intervention. You're suggesting, Thorne said, his voice dangerously soft, that a 21-year-old Omega who can't shift somehow orchestrated an assassination attempt against me and my elite guard, set an elaborate trap in a blizzard, and then nearly froze to death, saving us as part of some manipulation scheme. I'm suggesting, Garrick replied, that my stepdaughter is disturbed, that she's been obsessed with gaining status, with proving she's worth something, despite her deficiency. Setting a trap and then saving you would give her exactly what she's always wanted, attention, value, a place in a powerful pack. It's exactly the kind of thing someone desperate and mentally unbalanced might do. Rage flooded through Senna, hot and overwhelming. 10 years of abuse, of being called broken and useless and worthless, and now Garrick was using that very treatment as evidence against her, twisting her suffering into proof of instability. That's a lie. The words burst out before Senna could stop them. Every wolf at the table turned to stare, shock written across most faces. Omegas didn't speak in council, didn't interrupt, didn't challenge alphas. But Senna was done being silent. I didn't set any trap, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady even though her hands were shaking. I was in the medicine bow range because I was trying to avoid the Omega ceremony, because I knew it would be another public reminder that I'm broken, that I'm a disappointment. I found the wolves by accident, followed a blood trail, because that's what you do when you find injured creatures. I saved them because they were dying and I couldn't walk away from that. Of course you'd deny it, Garrick said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Mental instability often comes with delusions, with inability to see one's own actions clearly. Senna, I understand you've struggled. I recognize you've felt inadequate. But this manipulating the Alpha King, trying to play games at levels you don't understand, this is dangerous. Come home. Let us help you. The concern in his voice was masterful. To anyone who didn't know him, didn't know the truth, he'd sound like a caring stepfather, worried about a troubled child. But Senna knew better, and apparently so did Thorne. For a brief moment, something crossed Garrick's face. Not rage, something else. A flicker of what might have been regret, or perhaps the ghost of the man he'd been before ambition consumed him. But it vanished so quickly, Senna wondered if she'd imagined it. I've reviewed Senna's medical treatment of my wolves, Thorne said, his voice cutting across Garrick's false compassion. Every technique she used, every decision she made was precise and effective. She demonstrated knowledge our own healers don't possess. That's not the work of someone unstable or delusional. That's the work of someone highly intelligent and extensively self-educated. He stood and the room seemed to shrink around him, his presence overwhelming. But there's something else you should know, Alpha Brennan. My trackers didn't just find evidence from Elk Ridge at the trap site. They found evidence of at least 5 different packs. This wasn't a lone wolf operation. This was coordinated, planned, executed by multiple groups working together. Garrick's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that someone is building a coalition against the Northern Territories. Someone who believes they can kill me, fracture the 7 packs, and seize control of territory and resources currently under my protection. Thorne's smile was cold, sharp as broken glass. And I'm implying that Elk Ridge is part of that coalition, whether you personally set the trap or not. That's speculation, Garrick snapped, his composure cracking. You have no proof of any coalition. You have scent markers that could have been planted. You have a piece of cloth that proves nothing. And you have my clearly disturbed stepdaughter spinning stories to gain your favor. I have 33 witnesses who were there, Thorne countered. 33 wolves who smelled the same things my trackers did, who can testify to what we found. And I have this. Finian produced a folder, sliding it across the table toward Garrick. Mining permits, the beta said. Filed 6 months ago by Elk Ridge PAC requesting rights to extract silver from the Shoshone deposits on the Montana-Wyoming border. Deposits that are currently under Northern Territory's protection and forbidden from commercial exploitation. Well, Garrick didn't touch the folder. Requesting permits isn't illegal. The deposits have been dormant for decades. Elk Ridge has the equipment and expertise to extract the silver safely. The deposits are forbidden because unregulated silver mining creates weapons that can kill our kind, Thorne interrupted. The law is clear. No commercial extraction without Alliance oversight. Yet Elk Ridge requested permits 3 times, each time more insistently. Each time pushing harder against Northern Territory's policy. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. Tell me, Alpha Brennan, if someone wanted to start a war, if someone wanted to destabilize the Northern Territories and seize control of valuable resources, wouldn't a good first step be eliminating the Alpha King who stands in their way? The silence that followed was absolute. Senna could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Finally, one of the 7 PAC alphas spoke, an older wolf with grizzled features and eyes that had seen too much. Alpha King, these are serious accusations. If Elk Ridge is part of a conspiracy, if there really is a coalition forming, we need more than circumstantial evidence before we take action. Agreed, Thorne said, which is why I'm not taking immediate action. Instead, I'm opening a formal investigation. Elk Ridge will be subject to scrutiny. Your financial records, your communications with other PACs, your activities over the past year, all of it will be examined. Garrick's hands clenched into fists. You're treating me like a criminal based on speculation and the word of an Omega who's clearly unstable. I'm treating you like an Alpha whose territory's evidence was found at an assassination site, Thorne corrected. And as for Senna, she's not going back to Elk Ridge. The declaration rang through the chamber like a bell. Garrick's face went red, then white, then red again. She's my PAC member. My stepdaughter. You have no right. She saved my life and the lives of my elite guard. Thorne said, his voice absolutely final. That creates a debt under the oldest laws of our kind, a debt I intend to honor by offering her a position in my household as a healer. She's accepted. Senna Brennan is now officially under my protection, part of my PAC. You have no claim on her anymore. Senna's breath caught. He'd said she had a choice, had said she could take time to decide. But now in front of the council, in front of Garrick, he was claiming her publicly, making it official before she'd even fully agreed. She should have been angry, should have felt manipulated, trapped. Instead, she felt something else. Relief, safety. The sense that someone was finally standing between her and Garrick's cruelty. This is unacceptable, Garrick snarled. She's Elk Ridge Omega, our lowest ranked member. You can't just steal her. I'm not stealing anyone, Thorne said. I'm honoring a debt. And Senna, I'm asking you now in front of witnesses. Do you want to return to Elk Ridge, or do you want to stay here as my healer? Every eye in the room turned to her. Garrick's gaze was pure threat, promising retribution if she dared defy him. Several of the 7 alphas looked skeptical, like they couldn't believe an Omega would be given this choice. Finian's expression was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he was curious what she'd say. And Thorne was watching her with that intense amber stare, and his expression held no command, no expectation. Just a question. A real question with space for her to answer however she wanted. Senna stood. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees and kept her spine straight. When she spoke, her voice rang clear across the chamber. I choose to stay. I choose to serve as Alpha Ashford's healer, and I formally renounce my ties to Elk Ridge PAC. The words felt like cutting chains, like stepping off a cliff into open air, with no idea if she'd fall or fly. Garrick surged to his feet, his chair crashing backward. You ungrateful, delusional. Careful, Thorne said softly, but there was steel underneath the silk. She's under my protection now. That means any insult to her is an insult to me. Any threat to her is a threat to my household. Do you really want to go there, Alpha Brennan? Garrick's jaw worked, muscles jumping in his cheek. For a moment, Senna thought he might actually attack, might be stupid enough to challenge the Alpha King in his own council chamber. But he wasn't that stupid. He was angry, yes, humiliated certainly, But he was also calculating already, thinking 3 moves ahead. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The investigation will prove Elkridge's innocence. And when it does, I'll expect a formal apology for these baseless accusations." "If the investigation proves your innocence, you'll have it," Thorne agreed. "But until then, Elkridge is under scrutiny. Your activities will be monitored, your communications observed. Any attempt to interfere with the investigation will be considered an admission of guilt." He gestured toward the door. "This council is adjourned. Alpha Brennan, you and your entourage have 1 hour to leave Northern Territories. If you're still here after that, it will be considered an act of aggression." Garrick didn't move for a long moment, just stared at Senna with eyes that promised violence, promised retribution, promised that this was far from over. Then he turned and stalked from the chamber, his 30 wolves falling into formation behind him. The moment the door closed, Senna's legs gave out. She collapsed back into her chair, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaking. "You did well," Thorne said quietly, his hand settling on her shoulder. The touch was warm, grounding. "I recognize that wasn't easy." "You said I had a choice," Senna managed through the shaking. "You said I could take time to decide. But you just claimed me in front of the entire council." "I gave you a choice in front of witnesses," Thorne corrected. "You could have said no. You could have chosen to return to Elkridge. I would have honored that, even though it would have complicated things." Those eyes like molten gold held hers. "But Senna, your stepfather, came here with 30 wolves and an attitude that suggested he was prepared for violence. Leaving you unclaimed, unprotected, would have put you in danger. So I forced the moment, made you choose now instead of later. I won't apologize for that. Your safety matters more than your comfort." Senna wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways that was still manipulation, still taking her agency. But he was right. Garrick had come prepared for a fight. If Senna had been uncertain, uncommitted, Garrick would have taken her back to Elkridge by force if necessary. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Finian said, speaking for the first time since Garrick's departure, "we need to understand the full scope of this conspiracy. 5 packs working together, possibly more. Coordinated well enough to track the Alpha King's movements and set an ambush. This isn't amateur hour. This is organized, well-funded, and dangerous." He looked at Senna, calculation replacing curiosity in his expression. "Which brings us to you, Miss Brennan. You grew up in Elkridge. You've spent 10 years being invisible, overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. That means you've probably seen and heard things others didn't think you were important enough to notice. Things that might help us understand what Garrick has been planning." The request was clear. They wanted her to share information about Elkridge, about Garrick, about anything that might help them understand the conspiracy. It felt like betrayal, like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Elkridge had treated her terribly, yes, but it was still her birth pack, still the place she'd grown up, still home for better or worse. "I won't force you to speak against your pack," Thorne said, reading her hesitation. "That's your choice. But Senna, understand this conspiracy tried to kill me and 32 wolves who'd done nothing wrong, and it's likely to try again, probably targeting others. If you have information that could prevent deaths, could stop a war, I need you to think carefully about whether pack loyalty to wolves who never showed you loyalty is worth the cost." Senna closed her eyes, thinking, remembering. 10 years of observations of being invisible in corners while important wolves talked freely around her. "The mining permits," she said slowly. "Finian mentioned 3 requests over 6 months. But I remember Garrick talking about silver extraction for longer than that. At least a year, maybe more. He was obsessed with it. Said the Northern Territories were sitting on resources worth millions while refusing to exploit them." "Who was he talking to?" Finian's voice sharpened with interest. "When you heard these conversations, who else was present?" "Different alphas. I didn't always catch names, but there was one who came regularly, tall with a scar across his left cheek. He and Garrick would lock themselves in the office for hours talking about territories and trade routes and opportunities." One of the 7 pack alphas inhaled sharply. "That sounds like Alpha Caden of Iron Creek Pack. They're not part of the Northern Territories, but they border us to the south. Iron Creek has been pushing for expansion rights for years," another alpha added, "claiming their territory is too small to sustain their population. But their real goal has always been the Shoshone silver deposits." Pieces were clicking together. Senna could see it in the way Thorne and Finian exchanged glances, in the way the 7 alphas began whispering among themselves. "What else?" Thorne asked gently. "What else did you see or hear that seemed unusual?" Senna dug through memories, sorting through years of being invisible. "My mother's perfume, the lavender and rose. Garrick ordered it specially, had it custom made. He gives it to her on important occasions. But about 2 months ago, I saw her giving a bottle of it to someone else. Who? A woman, young, maybe mid-20s. I didn't recognize her, which was odd because I knew everyone in Elk Ridge. She and my mother met in the woods outside Pack territory. I was gathering herbs and saw them by accident. They didn't notice me. Can you describe her? Finian was taking notes now, his features hardening with determination. Blonde, athletic build. She wore clothing that suggested money-quality materials. And she had a tattoo on her wrist, 3 interlocking circles. Another sharp intake of breath, this time from Thorn. That's the mark of the Cascade Alliance, a coalition of packs that operate outside traditional territorial boundaries. They're mercenaries, essentially, available for hire to any pack with enough resources. If Garrick hired Cascade Alliance operatives, Finian said slowly, then this is bigger than we thought. Cascade doesn't come cheap. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars minimum. That kind of funding suggests this conspiracy has serious financial backing. The implications hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just a few ambitious alphas trying to grab power. This was organized crime, large-scale coordination with significant resources behind it. The Shoshone silver deposits, one of the 7 alphas said, if they could seize control of those mines, they could fund an entire war. Enough silver weapons to outfit an army. Enough profit from black market sales to buy loyalty from dozens of smaller packs. Which means this was never just about killing me, Thorn said, his voice grim. It was about creating chaos, fracturing the northern territories into smaller, weaker units that could be conquered or controlled. My death was just the opening move. Senna felt sick. She'd known Garrick was cruel, but this was cold, calculated evil on a scale she'd never imagined. And her mother was part of it, passing perfume to Cascade Alliance mercenaries, enabling assassination attempts. There's something else, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. The night of the blizzard, the night I found you all. Garrick was unusually agitated. He kept checking his watch, kept looking out the window, like he was waiting for confirmation of something. And when the blizzard hit, when it got really bad, he smiled. I remember thinking it was strange, being happy about a storm that severe. Because he thought we were dead, Thorn said. The blizzard was supposed to finish what the trap started. No survivors, no witnesses, just a tragic accident that would be blamed on weather. Except Senna found you, Finian added, and saved everyone. Which means the conspiracy knows their first attempt failed. Which means they'll try again, Thorn finished. His burning stare found Senna's. They'll try again and they'll be desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes, but they're also more dangerous. The council continued for another hour, strategies being discussed, security measures debated, investigations planned. Senna listened, contributing what she could when asked, but mostly just trying to process the enormity of what she'd stumbled into. She'd thought saving Thorn would be the end of the story. Hero's journey complete, go home with warm feelings of having done the right thing. Instead, it was just the beginning. The opening chapter of something much larger, much more dangerous than anything she'd experienced in her small, cruel life at Elk Ridge. When the council finally adjourned, Thorn walked her back to her quarters personally. They moved through the palace in silence, the afternoon sun painting the stone corridors gold. Finally, as they reached her door, Thorn spoke. Thank you for the information you provided. I'm aware it wasn't easy speaking against your birth pack. They stopped being my pack the day they decided I wasn't worth treating like a person, Senna said. Then more quietly, but it still feels like betrayal. That feeling means you're a good person, Thorn said. It means you have loyalty, integrity, principles. Don't apologize for that. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Senna, I need to tell you something about what we discussed in there, about the conspiracy, the danger. I figured, Senna said. I'm not stupid. If Garrick tried to kill you once, he'll try again. And I'm now officially part of your household, which makes me a target too. Yes, but more than that. His expression was serious, almost worried. When I claimed you as my healer, when I declared you under my protection, in front of the council, I made you visible. Important. For 10 years, you survived by being invisible, by being overlooked. That's not possible anymore. Everyone in the Northern Territories now knows who you are, knows you saved my life, knows I value you enough to defy another alpha to keep you here. So I need to learn to defend myself, Senna said, to fight to protect myself when you can't be there. Thorn smiled, and it was surprised, almost delighted. Most wolves in your position would ask for more guards, more protection. You immediately jumped to wanting to learn to defend yourself. You're remarkable, you understand that. Heat flooded Senna's cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not delivered with such sincerity. I'm practical. Guards can be bribed or killed. Skills are permanent. Then we start training tomorrow, Thorne said. Finian will work with you on strategy, on understanding pack politics and manipulation. I'll teach you combat. And our head healer, Alara, will help you formalize your medical knowledge. It was more than Senna had dared hope for. Education, training, the chance to become more than just a survivor. Why are you doing this? The question slipped out before she could stop it. You've already honored your debt by giving me a position here. This training me, protecting me, treating me like I matter, this is more than obligation requires. Thorne was quiet for a moment, those eyes like molten amber searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was soft but intense. In that clearing dying from silver poisoning. I watched you work, watched you treat each wolf with the same care, never choosing strongest or most important. You saved them in the order you found them, treating every life as equally valuable. Do you understand how rare that is? How unusual it is to find genuine compassion in our world? He took a half step closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just closer. You're not just an obligation, Senna. You're someone I want in my pack. Someone whose values align with what I've spent 89 years trying to build here. Someone who proved in the most dramatic way possible that strength isn't just about shifting or fighting or dominating others. Senna's heart was beating too fast. She was acutely aware of how close he was, how his presence seemed to fill the space around her. And underneath it all, that strange stirring in her chest, her dormant wolf pressing against her consciousness for the first time in years. I should rest, she managed. It's been a long day. Of course, Thorne stepped back, giving her space. Tomorrow morning training starts at dawn. Finian will meet you in the east courtyard. Dress comfortably. He turned to leave, then paused. Senna, what you did today in the council, standing up to Garrick, choosing to stay despite the fear that took real courage. Your father would have been proud. Then he was gone, leaving Senna alone with mountains and memories, and the growing realization that her life had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. She'd saved the Alpha King, and now he was trying to save her back in ways that went far beyond just offering protection. Day 6, first day of training. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning where the air felt sharp enough to cut. Senna woke to find training clothes laid out, flexible leather pants reinforced at the knees, a fitted tunic that wouldn't restrict movement, boots designed for grip rather than appearance. Whoever had selected them understood the difference between looking like a warrior and actually being one. The east courtyard was already occupied when she arrived. Finian stood at the center, wearing clothes similar to hers but clearly broken in by years of use. Around the perimeter, she spotted various weapons mounted on racks, staffs, daggers, short swords. Nothing silver, she noted. Training weapons for wolves who could heal from everything except that particular metal. Punctual, Finian observed as she approached. Good. We have a lot to cover and limited time to do it. I thought I was learning combat, Senna said, eyeing the weapons with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. You are. But combat isn't just physical. Finian gestured for her to follow him to a clear area of packed earth. It's mental, strategic, understanding your opponent before you ever throw a strike. So before we work on how to fight, we're going to work on how to think. He settled onto a bench, motioning for Senna to sit beside him. From this vantage point, they could see much of the palace wolves moving through their morning routines. Guards changing shifts, servants carrying supplies. Tell me what you see, Finian said. Senna looked confused. Wolves, going about their day. Look deeper. Tell me what you observe, not just what you see. She focused, trying to understand what he wanted. After a moment, she began noticing patterns. The guards, they're moving in coordinated pairs. One always has eyes on the palace while the other watches the perimeter. Good. What else? The servants carrying supplies are using specific paths, not just walking randomly, following routes that keep them visible to the guards but also efficient. Better. Approval dawned in his expression. You're learning to see systems, not just individuals. That's crucial, because when you're fighting, you're not just fighting a person. You're fighting their training, their patterns, their predictable responses. Understanding systems means you can predict behavior. He stood moving to the weapon racks. Now, conventional wisdom says an Omega who can't shift should learn weapons that compensate for physical weakness. Long range, perhaps. Bows, thrown blades. Keep distance between you and threats. But that's not what you think, Senna said, reading the skepticism in his voice. I think conventional wisdom assumes you'll always have access to weapons. What happens when you don't? When you're caught without a bow, without a blade, with nothing but your mind and body? Finian pulled two wooden staffs from the rack, tossing one to Senna. She caught it awkwardly, nearly dropping it. The weight was unfamiliar, the balance strange in her hands. Your strength isn't in physical power, Finian continued. It's in knowledge observation strategy. So that's what we develop. You need to understand anatomy, where to strike, to cause maximum disruption with minimum force. You need to read body language, predict attacks before they happen. You need to think 3 moves ahead while your opponent is still on move 1. He demonstrated a basic stance, weight distributed evenly, staff held loose but ready. Copy me. Senna tried. Her stance felt awkward, unstable. Finian circled her like a predator, adjusting her posture with clinical precision. Feet wider, knees bent. You're not trying to be immovable. You're trying to be ready to move in any direction instantly. They drilled the stance for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. By the time Finian called a break, Senna's legs were screaming and sweat had soaked through her tunic despite the cold morning air. Again tomorrow, Finian said as she collapsed onto the bench. Same time. We'll add movement, then basic strikes. But Senna, understand this isn't about making you a warrior who can defeat alphas in combat. It's about making you dangerous enough that attacking you becomes more costly than leaving you alone. It was a practical goal, realistic. But something in Senna bristled at the limitation, the assumption that she'd never be more than minimally threatening. What if I want to be more than just costly to attack, she asked. Finian's eyebrows rose. Ambitious. I like it. But Senna, you need to be honest with yourself about physical limitations. You're 5'4", maybe 120 pounds. You don't have a wolf form to draw on for strength or speed. Physics matters. So I work smarter, not harder, Senna said, echoing his earlier words. I learn things other wolves don't know, develop advantages they won't expect. Something shifted in Finian's features, recognition maybe. You sound like someone I used to know. He understood that true strength isn't just about muscle and teeth. What happened to him? He became Alpha King, Finian said simply, because he understood that lasting power comes from strategy, not just domination. But we'll discuss philosophy later. Right now, you need breakfast and rest. This afternoon, you're meeting with Alara, our head healer. Afternoon, the healer's laboratory. The palace healer's quarters occupied the western wing, positioned to catch afternoon sun that was said to have medicinal properties. Alara turned out to be a woman in her 60s with silver-white hair, sharp blue eyes, and hands marked by decades of delicate work. She examined Senna's medical kit with the intensity of an archaeologist studying ancient artifacts. Yarrow properly dried and powdered, willow bark processed for maximum efficacy. And this, she held up the small vial of wolfsbane paste. This should have killed those wolves, not saved them. How did you know the correct dosage? Trial and error, Senna admitted. I tested different concentrations on myself first, small amounts to see what happened. Alara's expression cycled through shock, horror, and finally grudging admiration. You tested poison on yourself. That's either brilliance or madness. I didn't have anyone else to test on, and I needed to understand how it worked, how the body processed it. Senna shrugged. The text said microdoses could theoretically counteract silver toxicity. I needed to know if theory matched reality. Show me your notes. Senna pulled out the battered journal she'd kept hidden for years, pages filled with careful observations, dosage calculations, reaction timings. Alara read in silence, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or approval. This is doctorate-level work, she finally said. Self-taught, no formal training conducted under impossible conditions. Senna, do you comprehend what you've accomplished here? You've developed a silver poisoning treatment that's more effective than anything in our official protocols. Pride warmed Senna's chest, unfamiliar and precious. I just did what seemed logical. Logic combined with courage and discipline. Alara set the journal down carefully. The Alpha King said you're to formalize your medical knowledge. Work with me, learn our techniques, share yours. By the end of 6 months, you'll have credentials that would make any pack grateful to have you as their healer. They spent the afternoon in Alara's laboratory, a space that made Senna's hidden cache of herbs look like a child's toy collection. Shelves lined with precisely labeled compounds. Equipment for distillation, extraction, preservation. Books, gods, so many books covering everything from battlefield medicine to rare toxins to the intersection of wolf physiology and human anatomy. This is yours now, too, Alara said, gesturing to the space. I'm old. I've been looking for an apprentice for years, but no one had the right combination of skill and temperament. You, Senna Brennan, have both. Days 6 to 9, the rhythm of training. The days fell into rhythm. Dawn training with Finian learning to read opponents to move efficiently, to strike with precision rather than power. Afternoons with Alara absorbing medical knowledge at a pace that left her head spinning, but hungry for more. Evenings studying in her quarters, reviewing notes, practicing techniques. On day 7, Finian introduced movement drills. Senna learned to pivot to sidestep to use an opponent's momentum against them. Her body protested every morning muscles she'd never properly used, screaming their complaints, but the pain felt good. Productive. Like growth. On day 8, Alara taught her about compound interactions, how certain herbs amplified or neutralized each other, how wolf metabolism processed substances differently than human. Senna's mind raced, connecting patterns, seeing possibilities she'd never had resources to explore alone. On day 9, during a water break, Senna noticed something strange. A young Omega carrying linens past the courtyard caught sight of her sparring with Finian and immediately lowered her eyes, not in fear, in something else, something that looked almost like deference. "Did you see that?" Senna asked Finian. "See what? That Omega." She looked at me like I was. Senna trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Like you matter." Finian's expression was knowing. "Because you do now. You're the Alpha King's healer. You sit at his left hand in council. You saved his life. Of course other wolves notice. But it felt like more than that, something Senna couldn't quite name, couldn't quite grasp. And through it all, Thorn. Not always present, but always aware. She'd catch glimpses of him in the palace corridors, moving with purpose between council meetings and diplomatic sessions. Sometimes he'd stop, ask about her training, her studies. The conversations were brief but intense, his amber gaze seeing too much understanding, things she hadn't said aloud. Day 10, Michen, the silver wound. Senna was in the healer's laboratory preparing a batch of wound salve when Thorn appeared in the doorway. His hair was disheveled, his shirt torn at the shoulder, and dark liquids stained the fabric. Blood. Not a lot, but enough. "I need you to examine something," he said, his voice tight with controlled pain. Alara took one look and vacated the room, muttering about giving them privacy. Senna's hands moved automatically, pulling supplies, clearing the work table. "Sit. Let me see." Thorn shrugged out of the torn shirt, revealing a torso marked by scars that told stories of decades of violence. But it was the fresh wound that caught Senna's attention, a long slash across his left shoulder, deep but clean. What happened? Disagreement during weapons training. One of the younger alphas got over-enthusiastic. Thorn settled onto the table, watching as Senna examined the wound with careful fingers. It wasn't serious. Would heal on its own within hours given his supernatural recovery. But the flesh around it looked inflamed, slightly discolored. "This was a silver blade," Senna said, recognizing the signs. "Training accident. The blade wasn't supposed to be real silver, but someone made a mistake in the armory." Thorn's jaw was tight. "It's fine. Just needs cleaning." "It's not fine. Silver poisoning doesn't care about intent." Senna gathered her supplies, purified water, wolfsbane tincture, clean bandages. "This is going to hurt." "I've survived worse." She believed him. The scars covering his torso weren't decorative. They were proof of battles won at terrible cost, of a life spent fighting. Senna worked in focused silence, cleaning the wound with techniques Alara had refined over decades. Thorn didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but she could feel tension radiating from him in waves. "The wolfsbane treatment," he said as she worked, "the one you used on us in the blizzard. Where did you learn that?" "Taught myself. Found references in my father's old veterinary texts about paradoxical reactions, substances that poison in large doses, but heal in small ones. Wolfsbane and silver work on similar principles, disrupting supernatural healing. I theorized that controlled exposure might help the body develop resistance or processing mechanisms." "You theorized?" Thorn's voice held something between amusement and awe. "Most healers follow established protocols. You create new ones based on theoretical frameworks you developed alone. I didn't have established protocols, just books and desperation and test subjects." She applied the wolfsbane tincture, watching for adverse reactions. "Meaning myself." Thorn's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Not hard, not threatening. Just suddenly there, his touch, sending unexpected heat racing up her arm. "You tested poison on yourself." "Small doses, carefully measured." Senna kept her voice clinical, professional, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped where his fingers pressed against her skin. "How else would I know if it worked?" "By not risking your life unnecessarily." "My life was an unnecessary risk. It was the only resource I had full control over." She gently extracted her wrist from his grip, needing the distance to think clearly. "I couldn't experiment on pack members. Couldn't ask for volunteers. So I volunteered myself." Thorn was quiet while she finished bandaging the wound, his intense stare tracking her movements with unsettling focus. Finally, as she stepped back to admire her work, he spoke again. Finian says you're learning quickly. That you have instincts for strategy most wolves take decades to develop. Finian is generous with his assessments. Finian doesn't do generous. He does accurate. Thorn rolled his shoulder, experimentally testing the bandage. He also says you asked about learning things other wolves don't know, developing unexpected advantages. Heat crept up Senna's neck. I don't want to be just a healer who hides behind guards. I want to be useful, valuable in ways that matter. You're already valuable, as the Omega you saved, as someone who did you a favor. Senna started cleaning up supplies, needing something to do with her hands. I want to be valuable on my own merit. For skills I develop knowledge, I earn contributions I make, not just because I happen to be in the right place at the right time. Thorn slid off the table, moving close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You think saving 33 lives was just luck? Just being in the right place? I think luck got me there. What I did after was just basic decency. Basic decency would have been saving one or two, then running for help. You stayed for 4 hours. You treated every single wolf with equal care. You nearly died because you refused to leave anyone behind. His hand came up, not quite touching her face, but close enough that she could feel the heat of it. That's not basic decency, Senna. That's extraordinary courage driven by compassion most people don't possess. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The air between them felt electric, charged with something she didn't have words for. I should finish cleaning, she managed. You should. But Thorn didn't move, didn't step back. Senna, I need to tell you something about what's happening between us. Nothing's happening between us. You're the Alpha King. Don't. The word was sharp. Don't diminish yourself. Don't fall into patterns of thinking you learned in a pack that wanted you small and invisible. He finally did touch her, then fingers gentle against her jaw, tilting her face up. Something is happening, has been since that clearing. When I was dying and you touched me, I felt something I haven't felt in 89 years. Recognition. Like my wolf knew yours even though yours is dormant. Senna's heart hammered against her ribs. That's impossible. I thought so too, but it's there. Every time we're close, I feel it. This pull, this certainty that you're important in ways I don't fully understand yet. You barely know me. I'm aware you risked your life to save strangers. I recognize you taught yourself advanced medicine with no resources and no support. I see you stood up to an alpha who'd spent 10 years breaking you down, and you did it without flinching. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch feather-light but burning. I understand enough to know I want to know everything. This is crazy, Senna whispered. You're the Alpha King. I can't shift. We're from different worlds. Are we? Because right now, standing here, we're just two wolves who found each other in a blizzard. Thorn's expression was intense, almost fierce. I'm not asking you to make any decisions, Senna. I'm just asking you to acknowledge that something's here. Something real. Before she could respond, before she could process any of what he was saying, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Thorn stepped back smoothly, the moment broken as Finian appeared in the doorway. My lord, we have a situation. The perimeter guards just caught someone trying to infiltrate the palace grounds. Thorn's demeanor shifted instantly from whatever he'd been moments ago to pure alpha authority. Who? We don't know yet. Female young carrying Elkridge identification. Finian's eyes flickered to Senna. She's asking for Senna Brennan specifically. Says it's urgent. Says lives depend on it. Senna's stomach dropped. My mother. We don't know if it's your mother, Finian said carefully. We don't know if this is genuine emergency or a trap, which is why we're being cautious. I need to see her. Senna was already moving toward the door. If she came all this way, if she's asking for me, it's important. Thorn caught her arm. We do this carefully, under guard in a secure location. If this is a trick, if she's here to harm you or gather intelligence, then you'll protect me. You said so yourself. Senna met his eyes. But if she's really in trouble, if she came here for help, I need to know. The sisters returned. The holding room was small, windowless, with a single table and 2 chairs. The woman sitting in one of them looked up as Senna entered, and recognition hit like a punch to the gut. Not Cordelia. Marlo. Her half-sister from her father's first marriage, older by 3 years, someone Senna hadn't seen since she was 11 years old. Marlo had left Elkridge shortly after their father died, unable to bear watching Cordelia take over, watching everything change. Senna. Marlowe stood and Senna could see the family resemblance. Same brown hair, same gray eyes. But where Senna had learned to make herself small, Marlowe carried herself with confidence born from years away from Garrick's influence. Thank the gods. I wasn't sure you'd see me. What are you doing here? Senna was aware of Thorne and Finian flanking her of guards positioned outside the door. How did you even know where I was? Word travels. Omega saves Alpha King isn't exactly subtle news. Marlowe's smile was brittle. I came because you need to know what's happening at Elk Ridge, what Garrick and Cordelia are planning. Planning, man. Marlowe pulled a small USB drive from her pocket, sliding it across the table. 7 years of evidence. Emails between Garrick and 5 other alphas. Financial records showing money being funneled into offshore accounts. Shipment manifest for silver weapons. Plans for a coordinated attack on Northern Territories holdings. Thorne moved forward, examining the drive without touching it. Why bring this to us? If you had this information, you could have gone to the Alliance directly. Because the Alliance is compromised. Marlowe's voice was flat. One of their senior arbiters is on Garrick's payroll. Anything I reported through official channels would have been buried. But you, she looked at Thorne, you're still clean, still trustworthy. And Senna deserves to know what her family's been doing. Our family, Senna corrected softly. Garrick is your stepfather too. He stopped being my family the day he married our father's widow and turned Elk Ridge into his personal empire. Marlowe's hands clenched on the table. I left because I couldn't watch what he was doing, but I kept tabs, kept gathering evidence, hoping someday I'd have the chance to stop him. Finian had produced a laptop, was already plugging in the drive with gloved hands. The screen flickered to life folders appearing. He clicked through methodically, his features growing darker with each file. This is extensive, he finally said. Communications dating back 18 months. 5 alphas confirmed Elk Ridge, Iron Creek, Stone Valley, Red Pine, Shadow Canyon, discussing territorial expansion, resource exploitation, specifically the Shoshone silver deposits. Keep reading, Marlowe said. The part about insurance policy is near the end. Finian scrolled, then stopped. His expression went very still. Alpha King, you need to see this. Thorne read over his shoulder and Senna watched his jaw tighten, watched fury flash across his face before he controlled it. What? She demanded. What does it say? Your sister, Thorne said, his voice carefully controlled. Not Marlowe. The other one. Autumn. I don't have another sister. Confusion flooded through Senna. My father only had Marlowe and me. Cordelia didn't have children before marrying Garrick. You're right. I apologize. I meant Garrick's daughter from his first marriage. Those eyes like molten gold found hers. Her name is Autumn, 24 years old. And according to these emails, she's been trained for the past 6 months specifically to infiltrate this palace and eliminate you. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did, and the world tilted sideways. Eliminate me. Why would anyone waste resources eliminating an Omega? Because you're not just an Omega anymore, Marlowe said quietly. You're the Alpha King's healer. You're under his direct protection. You're visible, valuable, positioned exactly where Garrick can use you. She leaned forward. Senna the trap in the medicine bow range that wasn't supposed to kill the Alpha King. It was supposed to injure him badly enough that he'd need intensive medical care. Care that Autumn was supposed to provide, having positioned herself as a traveling healer. Understanding dawned cold and terrible. But I saved him instead. I ruined the plan. Completely, Marlowe confirmed, which is why Garrick's scrambling now. His elaborate scheme to get someone close to the Alpha King failed because his stepdaughter, the one he'd written off as useless, turned out to be the most skilled healer anyone had seen in decades. So now the plan is to eliminate the complication, Thorne said, his voice hard. Remove Senna probably in a way that looks accidental or natural. Then introduce Autumn as a replacement healer, someone conveniently available to help the Alpha King deal with his grief. It's elegant, Finian admitted grudgingly. Cruel but elegant. Turn a failure into an opportunity. Senna's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the table, trying to process. Garrick hadn't just been cruel to her because she couldn't shift. He'd been cruel because he was systematically breaking her down and ensuring she'd be too damaged, too invisible to ever pose a threat to his plans. And now those plans included having her killed. When Thorne's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. When is Autumn supposed to make her move? The full moon gathering, Marlowe said. 3 weeks from now. All 7-pack alphas will be here for the traditional celebration. Lots of visitors, lots of chaos, lots of opportunities for accidents. Autumn's supposed to arrive as part of Stone Valley Pack's delegation position, herself close to Senna, and strike when the moment's right. 3 weeks, Finian murmured. That gives us time to prepare, to set our own trap. No, Senna's voice was sharp, surprising herself. Not a trap, an opportunity. Three pairs of eyes turned to her. Thorne's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in that burning gaze. Interest, maybe? Or recognition of something familiar? Explain, he said. Senna stood, her mind racing but crystallizing into clarity. Garrick's plan depends on me being weak, vulnerable, easy to eliminate. On me being the same broken Omega I was when I left Elk Ridge. But I'm not anymore. I'm learning to fight. I'm developing skills. I'm becoming dangerous. In 3 weeks, Finian's skepticism was clear. Senna, no offense, but you started training 10 days ago. That's not enough time to fight an alpha in direct combat, no, but to survive long enough for help to arrive, to create enough chaos that Autumn's plan fails. Maybe, she looked at Thorne. You said I needed to be costly enough to attack that people would leave me alone. Let's prove that. Let's use Autumn's attempt to demonstrate exactly how costly attacking your household has become. Marlowe was staring at her with something like awe. You've changed. The Senna I remember would have hidden behind guards, not volunteered as bait. The Senna you remember spent 10 years learning to survive by being invisible. Senna corrected. I'm done being invisible. If Garrick wants to come after me, let him. But he's going to learn that the Omega he dismissed as worthless is a lot harder to kill than he thinks. Thorne circled the table, stopping directly in front of her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. You comprehend what you're proposing. You see yourself as bait is dangerous. If anything goes wrong, if Autumn is better than we expect, if the timing is off by even seconds, I could die, I'm aware. Senna met his eyes steadily. But I could also win. And Thorne, I need to win this myself, not just survive it, not just be rescued. I need to prove to Garrick, to this court, to myself, that I'm not the victim he tried to create. For a long moment, Thorne just looked at her. Then slowly he smiled. It was fierce, proud, almost wolfish. Then we train you properly, he said. Not just basics, everything. Combat strategy, reading opponents, exploiting weaknesses. 3 weeks is barely enough time, but we'll make it work. He looked at Finian. Clear my schedule. Training takes priority. My lord, you have diplomatic sessions, council meetings, which can be rescheduled or delegated. Thorne's voice held absolute finality. Senna's right. This is an opportunity, but only if we prepare properly. So that's what we're going to do. He turned back to Senna, and the intensity in those eyes, like molten amber, made her breath catch. You want to be strong enough to fight your own battles, I'll make sure you are. But Senna, understand, once we start down this path, there's no going back. You'll be declaring yourself a player in this game, not just a piece on the board. Are you absolutely certain? Senna thought about 10 years of being invisible. 10 years of accepting cruelty because fighting back seemed impossible. 10 years of surviving instead of living. I'm certain, she said. Marlowe stood, a small smile playing at her lips. Dad would be proud, you know. Both of us fighting back against the man who tried to erase his legacy. Something warm unfurled in Senna's chest. Family. Real family, not the poisonous version Garrick and Cordelia had created. Stay, she said impulsively, here at the palace. Help us prepare. You know Garrick's tactics better than anyone. I was hoping you'd ask, Marlowe admitted, because I've spent 7 years gathering evidence, and I'm not missing the chance to watch it being used against him. Finian was already making notes, planning his mind, working through scenarios. Thorne had moved to the window, staring out at mountains bathed in afternoon light. And Senna stood at the center of it all, feeling something shift inside her. Not her dormant wolf, not yet, but something equally important. Purpose. Direction. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Day 12. Evening, the decision. That night, alone in her quarters, as Senna reviewed her notes from Alara's lessons, anatomy diagrams showing pressure points, chemical formulas for compounds that could incapacitate without killing. Thorne's combat training schedule, meticulously planned to cover the next 19 days. Her hand cramped from writing. She flexed it, noticing how the calluses had started forming. Warriors' hands, not servants' hands. Outside her window, the full moon hung low over the Teton Peaks, casting silver light across snow-covered slopes. 19 days until the gathering. 19 days until autumn. Senna closed her journal and stood moving through combat stances Finian had drilled into her that morning. Her body protested she'd be sore tomorrow, muscles screaming their complaints about being pushed beyond comfortable limits. But that was good. Pain meant growth, meant transformation. I'm not the victim anymore, she thought, practicing a strike sequence in the moonlight. The movements were still clumsy, unpracticed. but they were hers. Earned through effort, not given through genetics. She thought about that strange moment in the blizzard when wolf number 17 had looked at her with something like submission, about the omega in the courtyard lowering her eyes, about the way her dormant wolf stirred more strongly each day, pressing against her consciousness like it was testing boundaries, searching for a way out. What if her wolf wasn't broken at all? What if it had been waiting for something, for her to be ready? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. A knock at her door interrupted her musings. "Come in," she called, expecting Marin with evening tea. Instead, Thorn entered carrying a small wooden box. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, I was just practicing." Senna suddenly felt self-conscious, aware of how she must look sweaty, disheveled, in training clothes instead of proper attire. "Good." Thorn set the box on her table. "I brought you something. For the training ahead." Senna opened the box to find a dagger beautifully crafted but clearly functional. The blade gleamed in the moonlight, not silver, but something else. Iron, maybe. The hilt was wrapped in worn leather shaped by years of use. "This was my first weapon," Thorn said quietly. "Given to me when I was young, still learning to fight. It saved my life more than once." "I can't take this," Senna protested. "It's too valuable, too personal. Which is exactly why I'm giving it to you." Thorn's hand covered hers warm and steady. "Senna, in 3 weeks, you're going to face someone who wants you dead. Someone trained, prepared, dangerous. I need you to have every advantage. And I need you to understand that you don't face this alone." "Why do you care so much?" The question slipped out raw and vulnerable. "I'm nobody, just an Omega who happened to be in the right place at the right time." Thorn's expression softened. "You're wrong. You're not nobody. You're the wolf who chose compassion over survival, who saved 33 lives when you could have saved yourself, who stood up to your abuser in front of a council of alphas, who volunteered to be bait to protect others." He stepped closer and Senna's breath caught. "You're someone who sees value in every life regardless of rank. Someone who creates knowledge instead of just consuming it. Someone who makes me believe that the pack I'm trying to build, one based on merit and compassion instead of just strength, is actually possible." "Thorn, I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just telling you the truth. You matter, Senna. Not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are. And I will do everything in my power to make sure you survive what's coming." Senna looked down at the dagger in her hands, feeling the weight of it. The weight of his words. The weight of everything changing around her and inside her. "I'll keep it safe," she finally said. "And I'll use it if I have to." "I know you will." Thorn moved toward the door, then paused. "Tomorrow we increase the training intensity. 6 hours daily instead of 4. Finian in the morning, me in the afternoon, Alara in the evening. It's going to be brutal." "I can handle brutal." "I know." That fierce smile again. "Sleep well, Senna. You're going to need it." After he left, Senna held the dagger, testing its balance, feeling how it fit her hand. Through her window, the full moon watched, and somewhere deep in her chest, her dormant wolf stirred again. Stronger this time. Closer to the surface. 19 days, she thought. 19 days to become dangerous. 19 days to transform from prey to predator. The broken Omega from Elk Ridge was dead. In her place stood something new. Something still forming, still learning, but no longer willing to be defined by what she couldn't do. In 3 weeks, autumn would come. Garrick's plan would unfold, and Senna would be ready. Not to hide, not to be rescued, but to fight back. And maybe, just maybe, to discover what her wolf had been waiting for all along.